Hi, Sumant. Thanks so much for your time. I'm looking forward to discussing your views around decarbonization and how we are at the trilemma of, I always call it the trilemma around affordability, reliability, and clean energy. And really keen to understand your viewpoint around some of the good stuff you are doing. And so I have come up with certain questions which I would like to go through with you. And look, the questions are more around the clean energy, the renewable energy scenario, how we are looking at the new energy, which is mostly around hydrogen, EVs. So look, happy to deep dive into it if you're ready. And thanks again, Sumant, for your time today.
No problem, Shailesh. Thank you so much for having me on this program, and thank you to ETH as well. But do go ahead. I'm excited and looking forward to getting into the conversation with you.
Thank you, Sumant. So in terms of, look, my first question is more around the renewable energy. How is the renewable scenario shaping up globally? What source of energy you feel will be the major focus in the roadmap for decarbonization? So that's the first question. So,
okay. Please. Well, Shailesh, I think everybody recognizes that renewable energy is at a very, phenomenal or singular point in its evolution where growth is likely to be very, very substantial going forward. Globally, there's about 1,000 gigawatts of renewable energy installed, wind and solar primarily. That is likely to grow over the next 20 to 30 years by 20 to 30 times. So it's going to be an astounding growth that we see. To give you another context, up till now, we had been investing about $1 trillion in the oil and gas sector and the electricity sector put together. Now we need that almost that same amount of investment to happen only in renewables going forward. And in fact, more than that as well, if we have to meet these targets. And so there is going to be a lot of evolution. Technology is moving very rapidly in our sector. It is driving down costs very substantially, and that is in fact leading to the faster adoption of renewable energy. We all know that there is a massive climate change imperative as well. We cannot decarbonize our electricity sectors fast enough. And what is now happening more and more interestingly is that new technologies emerging that will really move renewable electricity into the bigger energy space. And that will lead to another level of growth in our sector, which is going to be quite interesting. So there's a lot of change that is happening, driven primarily by cost reduction, by climate change, by technology evolution, and now by the realization that renewable energy is the electricity and the energy source of the future. And that's really driving growth, massively in our sector now.
Thanks, Sumant. Look, my experience has been mostly overseas and mostly in Australia and New Zealand, and I've seen how it became imperative to reduce emissions, for the country. But look, that's global now. Everyone realizes that it's a requirement to explore clean energy sources, low carbon transition, as they say. But in terms of what are your views around the linkage of decarbonization with the World Economic Forum mandate around climate stabilization, right? Because somehow there is a clear understanding that if we really want to meet the target of 1.5 degrees, right? We are already lagging behind the target set in 2015. And if you look at our current policies, the best case scenario, it will lead to an increase of 2.1 degrees. And the worst case scenario, close to 4 degrees, 3.9 as they say. So what are your views around meeting that, as they say, the 1.5 degree target? What are your views around that and the role of renewable energy in that?
Yeah. So, I think the 1.5 degrees centigrade temperature increase is already baked in. I don't think there's any way in which we are not going to have that temperature change happening. 1 degree centigrade has more or less happened. And the latest IPCC report that came out has already said that we are well on the path to hitting 1.5 degrees by 2030. That a number of those changes that temperature change is causing are irreversible changes, and we unfortunately will have to live with it. So unfortunately, whether we like it or not, I think 1.5 degrees is already behind us. The question is, how much can we limit the global warming to keep it as close to 1.5 as we can?
Yeah.
And there really a lot of work needs to be done. As you rightly said, that if you add up all the commitments that we got from various countries at the Paris Climate Accord, it probably takes us to a 3.5 degrees centigrade
Yes.
path. And obviously now COP26 will happen in Glasgow. We expect all the countries of the world to revise and increase their NDCs. Various countries, as you know, have announced net zero targets, including China. And therefore, clearly there is momentum building towards making sure that we have more ambitious targets being announced at COP26. But based on whatever has been stated so far, it does look like even post those targets, we'll be heading towards anything between 2.5 to 3 degrees centigrade temperature change. So the reality is that the world is not doing enough, and it is therefore very scary. Now, the second question you asked was, what is the role of renewable energy in enhancing this decarbonization? Now, just to give you some very basic numbers, today the total carbon budget that we have is about 800 gigatons of carbon. That is how much we're able to put into the atmosphere. We are going at the rate of almost 10 gigatons every year, and we already have 550 gigatons in the atmosphere right now. So at 10 gigatons, it'll take us 25 years, after which we cross all of our carbon budgets, right? So, and we know that the 10 gigatons is actually increasing every year.
Yeah.
Now, here is where it becomes very important to look at where is this carbon coming from. Now, 75 to 80% of the carbon actually derives from our energy sector. And therefore, what we do on the energy front, and the balance, by the way, comes from agriculture and other miscellaneous areas. Now, what we therefore do on the energy front is fundamentally critical towards what happens on this 10 ton of carbon that we emit every year. Now, within energy, electricity accounts for only about 25%. Okay, the balance comes from the area of mobility, which includes seaborne, land, and airborne, and the hard-to-abate sectors, the industrial sectors, cement, steel, fertilizers, refineries, those kinds of areas. And one small amount comes from buildings and so on.
Yes.
So we have to therefore have a plan and a strategy to looking at decarbonizing the other areas. Within the electricity sector, I would say that the pathway towards decarbonizing it through renewable energy is now very well laid out and very well understood. It's now a question of just implementing those changes fast. There are, of course, issues around managing the intermittency of the grid and all of those things. But with the evolution of battery technology, I'm sure those solutions will be found. The issue is that we don't have solutions yet for the industrial sector, nor do we have solutions yet fully for the mobility sector, although technology change is happening there as well. So those are two sectors that we really need to move forward on. So one way to do that is by deepening electrification in both of these areas, having more and more electricity contribute to the energy mix, rather than, let's say, by burning oil and natural gas, having electric vehicles, for example, or by using green hydrogen, rather than, again, gas or some other form of fossil fuel, and that green hydrogen being made through electrolysis using renewable electricity. So there are lots of those changes that are now beginning to happen. That visibility is now slowly coming in. And for countries like India, there is this massive, massive opportunity. Because if you look at it, India is an energy deficient country. We import almost $160 billion of fossil fuels every year between oil and gas and fossil and coal, right? And this is really where we can actually use green hydrogen to fundamentally reduce our dependency on fossil fuel imports by having a much broader renewable energy mix, cracking water to create hydrogen, and thereby use that into the energy sector. So there's a massive, massive opportunity for a country like India. We must really grab that opportunity and really use this as an opportunity to really green our entire economy. And in doing so, additionally, Shailesh, create industries of the future in India, which will then allow a country like India to leapfrog and take leadership in these vast new emerging industries that are coming up. So I think that's really the opportunity for us in the context of climate change.
No, that's rightly said. And thanks, Sumant. It's if we start looking at IPCC AR6 report, as you mentioned, I think they are very clear. The only viable pathway to control the temperature is immediate net zero commitment, right? And there's a lot happening. I mean, you're right. 137 countries are part of this race to net zero. It's being tracked by various agencies, of course, IEA and all, but Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit has confirmed quite well these pledges and coalitions, policy statements by governments. I think I really like the way you covered the options, right? And the options around, of course, renewable energy, how companies and are exploring wind and solar portfolios and the scenario analysis as per TCFD. But yeah, I mean, and the target is big, right? I mean, the target is around 80% of global power generation has to be met by renewables 2050. That's a big number. But there's a lot of focus on nuclear energy. Electric mobility, as you mentioned, has its own challenges. There's a lot happening. And apart from CCUs and CCS, as they say, but I mean, a great linkage is hydrogen, as you explained, right? Using hydrogen fuel as a source of energy. So Sumant, how do you think will hydrogen fuel can evolve, as I said, the fuel of the future, right? What are some of the technological interventions that are already taken in the space, and some of it which you see will come, right? In terms of course, you talked about green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, a lot of analysis done. But yeah, what are your views around in this 2050 journey, hydrogen's role on this journey?
So as I said, electricity accounts for only about 25% of total energy consumption.
Yes.
Now that will increase because in mobility, we are seeing electric cars becoming a bigger part. And so that the electric vehicles will obviously be supplied through electricity. And therefore, the percentage share of the electricity basket within energy will go up, right? But there is still, even if it goes from 25 to 35% or 40%, there is still going to be a number of other areas in the energy basket which will not be covered by electricity, by deepening electrification, as it were, of the energy sector. And there, actually, hydrogen provides a very interesting bridging fuel, where we make the green hydrogen through renewable electricity, and then that hydrogen, becomes part of use cases in the hard-to-abate sectors, as well as in mass transportation. And because of the higher fuel density of energy density of hydrogen, potentially also in maritime uses, and maybe eventually in aviation, right? That although solutions still have to be found there. And so if that happens, then essentially you're able to take renewable electricity into a much broader part of the energy mix than you can do today. So hydrogen is this incredible bridging fuel. Of course, making green hydrogen is still expensive, right, through renewable energy, but hopefully over time with technology evolution, that cost will come down to a point where whether you make green hydrogen or whether you make gray hydrogen, the cost is the same. And then it's just a question of replacing the gray with the green and extending the use of green hydrogen into other areas, especially around, where oil and gas is used, like mobility and so on. And also in city gas networks, for example. So I think hydrogen has an incredibly important role to play. And especially in an economy like India, where, as I said earlier, oil is not available and we import a lot of our oil, there we can actually have everything domestically produced and not be reliant on any other country for energy, become totally self-reliant. And that's an incredible opportunity for us. And I think that's the role that hydrogen can actually play in the grid of the future and in the energy system of the future. So it is a very, very important aspect of the evolution of the decarbonized energy system.
No, thank you. Look, hydrogen, there's a lot of hydrogen feasibilities happening, right? Clients are looking for understanding the role of hydrogen. And but in terms of safety, what are your views around safety? There's a lot of safety concerns around hydrogen. And look, a lot of work has already been done in that space, but what are you seeing in your field of work?
Yeah, well, Shailesh, hydrogen is still at a very sort of infancy stage at this point in time. Right. And when I say hydrogen, I'm really talking about green hydrogen.
Yeah.
Right. The whole industry is just starting right now. And I would say that there is a lot of promise, but a lot of the implementation still has to be done. And a lot of the business models, a lot of the aspects of the technology solution, You talked about safety. All of those still have to be proven. I think what is very clear is that you cannot transport hydrogen over long distances, right? Unless you have dedicated pipelines and so on, which are going to be enormously expensive.
Yes.
So while you can't transport hydrogen, what you can transport more easily is electricity. So therefore, we need to have a situation where you have electrolyzers close to the point of usage, and you ship the electricity to those electrolyzers through transmission lines, produce the hydrogen and use it right there, rather than have hydrogen, transported over long distances, which is not very viable unless you convert it into ammonia and so on. But then there is a lot of loss in energy efficiency. So therefore, I think these business models of exactly where can you ship the electricity and make the hydrogen on site, where can't you do that? All of those are things that we will, I think, over the next few years, really understand better.
Yeah.
And that will then lead to the evolution of business models, because we can have technology, we can have policy, but ultimately, if you don't have the right business models, people are not going to be willing to invest, and therefore nothing will happen. So I think the right business models will also evolve with time, and I think it's going to take 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen immediately. But I think why people are excited is because everybody has the playbook of solar in mind, where solar started off being very expensive and costs came down to such an extent that people can't even scarce believe it any longer, right? And so everybody assumes that the same will happen to any other technology in our sector, whether it's batteries, whether it's hydrogen, or things like that. So I think that's really the expectation, and therefore that is causing the excitement as well.
No, thank you. No, absolutely. I really like the way you explain the role of hydrogen in power gen. If you look at power generation, hydrogen is one of the leading options for storing renewables, right? And if you look at hydrogen and ammonia, they can be used in gas turbines to increase power system flexibility. Renewables you covered, absolutely. Hydrogen can enable renewables to provide an even greater contribution. I think it has the potential to help with variable outputs from renewables, which is an issue, combined with PVs and wind, absolutely. And we have seen a lot of pilot projects happening in that space. But yeah, and I think there's a couple of other things, right? I mean, how you can look at the stored energy, as you explained, with hydrogen, because that's something which can be the lowest cost option for storing electricity over days, weeks, and even months. And the other thing, what we are saying, I think you covered well in terms of the industry. Hydrogen use today, look, is dominated by industry, oil refining, ammonia production, methanol production, steel production. And all of this hydrogen is supplied using fossil fuels. So there's a lot of potential to reduce emissions there as well. I think I would like to, I can cover transport. I think the competitiveness of hydrogen fuel cell cars, I think it will depend on the fuel cell cost, as you explained, so it's in infancy, and how refueling stations for trucks and how they can prioritize those. Yeah, so that's interesting, and shipping and aviation will follow. So limited options there. What do you think in terms of, you covered the whole blending, you covered for example, in buildings, right? Hydrogen could be blended into existing natural gas networks with the highest potential in multifamily and commercial buildings. And there's a lot of debate happening in that space, particularly in densities, while longer term prospects, if you look at, could lead to direct use of hydrogen in hydrogen boilers or fuel cells. But what's your take on that? Because that's an interesting concept, right? How you can look at hydrogen and buildings and reduce emissions.
To be honest with you, I haven't done much work in that area.
Yeah.
So I won't be able to give you a very clear answer. I suspect that nobody really has done a lot of work.
Yeah.
I think at this point, what is being discussed is whether, in fact, if you have a gas distribution network or pipeline in buildings or going into homes, can some part of that gas be replaced by some degree of hydrogen? Is that safe? Is that possible? Can pipelines handle it, or is it too flammable? Will that lead to safety issues? Yeah. So I think that is the kind of debate that is going on. Yeah. And I think we'll find the answers as we go forward. I don't think those answers exist.
No, not yet.
Time. Yeah.
True. No, it's all debates and discussions. Absolutely. So moving on to e-mobility, right? I mean, that it's an important aspect of decarbonization. So what is your take on e-mobility, especially when it comes to India's response to that? Mm-hmm. Do you feel the infrastructural support, for example, charging points, batteries, are adequate to to an e-mobility revolution in India? So what's your take there?
No, I don't think so. Not at this point in time. India is more of a two-wheeler market than we are, or even three-wheeler market than we are a four-wheeler market. And the good news is that we're seeing a lot of traction on the two-wheeler side. A lot of new companies are coming in to manufacture new electric vehicles and so on. Whether the model eventually that will succeed, whether it's battery swapping or whether it's battery charging within vehicles, I think that is something that different people will try different things, and we'll have to see what works. What is also not yet proven or demonstrated is where are people going to be charging their vehicles? Will it be at office or at home or somewhere on the roadside, like you have petrol pumps right now?
True.
Will it be there? Will you have fast charging enough infrastructures that people can just stop for 3 minutes and charge their vehicles? All of those are things that technology, of course, is evolving in different parts of the world, and we can at some point, import those technologies into India as well. I think what we need, however, is that we need a strong government mandate. We need a strong mandate that says that, let's say by 2030, X% of all the cars sold should be electric in nature. Because I think unless you drive the industry hard in that direction, they will not invest enough in setting up manufacturing capacities, and therefore costs will not be driven down fast enough. And I think at this point, the automotive industry which is just upgraded to various fuel efficiency standards and has made those investments right now, is loath to really invest large amounts in electric vehicles. So I think there needs to be some sort of a government mandate to push in that direction.
True.
And it's only then I think that you'll start seeing many more cars on the road which are electric in nature. And then along with that, commensurately, you'll have the startup of the battery charging ecosystem. So right now, everything is moving a little bit slowly in the absence of any kind of government mandates.
No, true. No, thank you. And look, when it comes to mobility, it's quite close to my heart, because we bought a Model 3. That's the cheapest option,
Okay.
Tesla, right? And we were apprehensive. My wife still has it, and it was, but the kind of support the government is providing in Oceania region, if I may say, in terms of flexible charging points, you can charge at home, right? They will give you a free assembly in your parking. You go to buy your weekend groceries and invest fields. So I think you're right. A lot of infrastructure, it's feasible, it's possible, and it's happening. But moving on, in terms of the whole debate around e-mobility, if we look at all transport modes, I think, look, all transport modes must be considered for feasibility when it comes down to implementing e-mobility solutions, because that's what countries are doing overseas, at least in the developed market. I mean, my personal opinion, e-mobility is the most powerful tool to shift towards cheaper and more efficient modes, right? For example, from cars, you mentioned bikes, e-bikes, e-buses, and it will provide access to opportunity for many. But in terms of when we should look at the alliances between developed and developing countries, to drive this agenda, making the cost of batteries financially viable. There's a lot happening in India, as you explained. Look, it's picking pace with 100% FDI possible. We are reading about new manufacturing hubs may come and all. But in terms of the government mandate, do you think there's a clear roadmap in terms of the federal subsidies and policy? Because overseas, I see that happening. So what's your take around that, around India's, in terms of the government policies, where they are heading to support this transition?
To support the transition to e-mobility, particularly?
Yes,
or
e-mobility.
or-
E-mobility.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, as I said, we don't have a government mandate yet for a certain percentage of cars being electric at this point. So I think that if it comes in will be quite useful. The government certainly is trying to encourage battery manufacturing in the country. Yeah. They've announced a production-linked incentive manufacturing scheme. But in the absence of demand creation, either on the grid management, on the stationary storage side, or on the e-mobility side, people might be a little bit reluctant to invest in battery technologies. So therefore, it may take some more time for that demand to be manifested and for people to invest in battery manufacturing. So between that and between lack of charging infrastructure, I think you'll see relatively slower uptake, except in, as I said, in the two-wheeler segment, where the value proposition is becoming a little bit more viable for e-mobility. So there it may be possible. I think for four-wheelers, passenger cars, it's not yet there. And for mass transit, certainly we have gas or LNG buses. Those depending on how things go, could be replaced with hydrogen, green hydrogen buses, but equally fuel cells using basically hydrogen fuel cells, or equally with batteries. So those things will happen, and there, because most mass transportation sits in the hands of the government, they can actually make those changes happen faster.
Right.
So I think passengers will take time, but I think the rest of the system can start moving.
No, absolutely. No, thanks, Sumant, because I remember very much aligned to what you just said. In September last year, they came up with this. There rumors around some incentives, and now, of course, the latest is this production-linked incentive scheme, right? And it covers automotive sector and all, and including hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So, in terms of the initiatives for the corporates, what are some of the initiatives the corporate should take beyond, I would say, more of a value chain approach, right? I mean, having look, I've been working in this space for 20 years, and a lot of work in scope 1, scope 2, a lot of work around what you can control in your operational boundary. But now with decarbonization, net zero, it's moving in the direction of value chain, scope 3. And so what are your views that, look, scope 3 emissions, they are fundamental for companies to realize credible climate change commitments. And I believe it's mandatory for all members for Race to Zero. Now, but there are challenges. And what do you think? What are some of the challenges in terms of how you really look at upstream for your suppliers and connect with your consumers or customers? So what are your views around that, the challenges around scope 3 emissions and value chain approach to greenhouse gas
emissions? I think if there is a pressure on corporates to shift even their scope 1, scope 2, I think even that's a big step forward. Okay, because keep in mind that one person's scope 3 is another person's scope 1 or scope 2.
Absolutely.
True. Right. So if there's pressure on everybody on scope 1 and 2, then automatically various people's scope 3s will also be taken care of. So I think that we need people to start really realizing, first measuring. I think that is where, first they need to be sensitized. Then they need to be able to start measuring what are their total emissions, right? What is the footprint that they have, and then only can they start. And even if they do scope 1 and scope 2, I'm fine with that, because let's at least start with that rather than reaching for the stars and not getting anywhere.
True.
So I would say let's just start doing that. And if each and every single company starts focusing on their scope 1 and scope 2, then automatically everybody's scope 3 will also be taken care of. So my suggestion is, let's start with that. Let's start measuring. Let's start putting pressure on people.
Right.
And let's start focusing people on their scope 1, scope 2.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's about quality of reporting, accuracy, repeatability, reliability. Absolutely. And then companies can look at net zero supply chains, amplify their impacts. And of course, you mentioned hard to abate sectors, as well. So yeah, baby steps. No, thank you. So in terms of, look, a lot of these things, you mentioned scope 1, 2, we talked about hydrogen, we talked about EVs, e-mobility. Technology will definitely play a big role, right? So my question to you is around some of the technological advancements like AI, advanced data analytics, how these will give further impetus to decarbonization. So what are your views in terms of, especially in India, and how corporates can go for value chain partnership? Some of the important aspect around decarbonization is to create this value chain partnership with a heavy focus on technology. So what are your views around that?
Yeah, so the reality is that opportunities are coming at us so thick and fast at this point, right? While we were still grappling with getting the generation side under control in terms of capacity addition. And I must tell you that there's so much capacity addition required that it's in, irrespective of how much competition there is, there's still not enough people adding capacity. There's still not enough capital coming in. But as it is, we were grappling with that issue. Now, over and above that, we have the opportunity in green hydrogen evolving. We have the opportunity in mobility. We have the opportunity in batteries and storage, right, and grid management issues. And you talked about the opportunity in digital and so on as well. So I think there's so much growth that is happening in our sector that all of that growth will be, I think, much better addressed if people focus on how to use data better, how to get more out of their assets. And data is going to be very critical for grid management as well. And the grid is going to become more and more complex because it's no longer going to be a unidirectional grid where you have big generating stations that take power to every single home. The home could be feeding power into the grid, and everything could be feeding power into electric vehicles, and maybe at some point drawing power out from electric vehicles as well. So it's going to be very complex, very multi-directional grid in the future, and therefore you need to have a very strong digital backbone to be able to manage all of this, both at the company level as well as at the grid level. So to my mind, digital is an absolutely integral aspect of this growth of this sector. Okay, and I think that is going to be very critical. And companies that go down that path will be more successful than companies that choose to stay old style and not going down that path. And our company, for example, we had started a digital aspect in our company 2-3 years ago, and the World Economic Forum gave us the recognition of being a global lighthouse for the use of digital technologies, making us actually the first renewable energy company in the world to have got that recognition. And so we've been very focused on this issue, that digital data analytics is very critical to driving better performance from a lot of our assets. And therefore, it is going to be a very important area. Now, the other thing is that as these new sectors evolve, one company cannot have expertise in all areas. So you will need to form partnerships, to get that expertise. So I think, again, partnerships is going to be very critical as well, to be able to find the right solutioning to meet the requirements of customers, whether they are, state-owned utilities or whether they are corporate customers.
Sure. Thanks, Sumant. Look, AI will play a key role in helping corporates and industries achieve net zero, and some of it will revolve around reduction in waste, productivity. Of course, you explain optimizing efficiency, yielding more economical utilization of resources. So yeah, so that's something, and of course, and I'm aware of some of the good work your company is doing. It's the way they are blending, accelerating renewables and technology in terms of energy efficiency, as I explained, in terms of strengthening collaborations, and yeah, so a lot happening and a lot of potential. Look, Sumant, I think this was great, very helpful, insightful, and thanks again. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shailesh, and again, thank you to ETH, I should say, for inviting me to this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks again.